You know what? Sometimes Destiny can be frustrating. I was thinking, what are the most frustrating things in all of Destiny? I came up with a bunch of ideas with some friends, and then I went to Twitter to get some extra ideas from the community for both PvE and PvP. So here comes the ultimate list of painful, unfair, horrible, excruciating, and keyboard breaking moments in Destiny 2. Let's start off easy. If you've been playing Destiny for any longer than a week, I guarantee you've come across this issue. You're loading into an activity and you decide to take those few precious seconds to sort through your inventory and make a few tweaks to your Guardian. But Bungie has different plans for you. They're ripping you right out of that menu not once, but every time you go back in to make a tweak. You think you're safe to menu surf until you're jarringly and annoyingly ripped out of your menu the second you encounter a new area. It's been a frustrating part of the game for nearly a decade now, and I wouldn't bet on it changing anytime soon. Here's a good one. Have you ever been the unfortunate recipient of bad luck matchmaking where you spawn into the losing team of a PvP game only to find out the match has ruled a mercy rule loss a few seconds later?
I've seen enough. I'm calling this one.
It's amazing how many times this happens, but I guess it's not surprising. People who are losing bad enough in PvP to trigger a mercy rule loss probably didn't want to stick around that game for too long, so Bungie decided that you were the lucky one to take their spot. At this point, there's a good chance that you've seen the clip of the game director Joe Blackburn in a fierce duel against a pesky Overload champion. As funny as his pain might be to watch, I know that almost all of us have been in a similar situation and it never happens at a convenient time. Whether that's a barrier champion that keeps diving behind cover right as its shield's about to pop up, or an unstoppable ogre who's charging at you and refuses to reset its stun, or an Overload champion who just won't stop teleporting. We've all been about one annoying champion away from backing out of the activity and heading straight to orbit, or maybe even just uninstalling the game if it's a particularly bad day. And if you're a newer player and you haven't yet found yourself in one of these duels against an uncooperative champion yet, you're in for a hefty dose of future frustration. Some people are born lucky and others are not. This mantra could not ring any more true in a game like Destiny 2, where most raid exotics are secured behind the fortress that is RNG. While Bungie has recently implemented a degree of RNG protection through things like Triumph completions, I've watched it time and time again where a teammate will get the raid exotic on the very first run and the person next to them still hasn't gotten lucky on run number 50. This despair only increases if it's an exotic in the rotator raids, as your ability to farm for it is locked behind months of waiting if you miss it. And this phenomenon definitely isn't a new thing in Destiny. Back in the original Vault of Glass raid almost 10 years ago, some Guardians were unlucky enough to wait months and months for their precious Vex Mythoclast to finally drop. Something that makes these irritating moments in Destiny even more tilting is when you're not only frustrated, but you're also hangry because you haven't eaten in a while. It's no good to play difficult stuff in games when you're only running on fumes. I've tried many of the different meal prep services over the years and I really like some of them, but hands down my favorite has been Cook Unity. I've had their food delivered a few times now and every single meal has been delicious. They take a slightly different approach than the other guys. Instead of just bulk cooking everything in some monster kitchen factory, they work with local talented chefs who become your personal chefs. This team cooks up delicious fresh meals every day in regional micro kitchens, and that food is delivered right to you. They also offer plenty of options for different dietary types, so if you're eating paleo or gluten-free or vegan or any other type of dietary restriction, you'll have plenty of options. Every meal arrives already fully cooked, so all you need to do is heat it up, and the recommended heating instructions are provided directly from the chef. In my most recent shipment, I got the pork asado bao buns and the hoisin glazed skinless pork belly made by Chef Stacy Barang from Los Angeles. I tend to love Asian cuisines, and these were really good together and they were both amazing. I also tried the crispy chicken schnitzel made by Chef Chris Rattel from New York. It was delicious too, and I actually tried cooking that one in my air fryer, which made it even more crispy and amazing. If you want to give Cook Unity a try, the subscription is super flexible and they let you pause or skip weeks or cancel at any time. Just go to cookunity.com/pattycakes50 or click the link in the description and use my code pattycakes50 to get 50% off of your first order of Cook Unity meals to try them out for yourself. Let's talk some PvP. You see this thing? This is the RTX 4090, arguably the best gaming graphics card in the world as of right now. And it's responsible for drawing these things. These are walls and they're supposed to protect you from enemy fire. But some of the Destiny players out there are apparently too good to obey the simple rule that walls are supposed to stop bullets. And then you get situations like these. Look, I swear I'm not going insane, that bullet went right through that wall. Sure, maybe it's technically a latency thing, and if you saw the perspective of the player on the other side, maybe it looks totally legit, but it's no fun feeling like you should be safe only to die through the wall, and unfortunately with the netcode it happens way too often in Destiny. When your opponent just ignores walls altogether thanks to their McDonald's Wi-Fi connection, it's pretty hard to stomach. Speaking of lag, this could be a whole topic by itself, whether you're getting shot through walls or just while you're out in the open. Latency in PvP is a massive problem from time to time, and when the population is low, it seems to get even worse. I've collected so many laggy player clips that I could probably make an entire montage video out of just showcasing how many ridiculous things I've seen over the years. If I had a single wish for this game, it would be dedicated servers with higher tick rates, at least for the competitive modes, to cut down on some of these shenanigans. But I'm not holding my breath on that one. There's a specific thing caused by lag that can create one of the most unfair situations that can ever happen to a Destiny player. And when it happens, many people have no idea what just hit them. The damage glitch. If you're a newer player, you might not be too familiar with this strange mechanic. Basically, thanks to internet lag and Destiny's wonky netcode, sometimes people will land bullets on you that count as hitting you 2 or 3 times instead of just once. So that ordinary hand cannon bullet that doesn't seem too daunting has evolved into a 7 times Hawkmoon shot that takes you right to the death screen. Whenever it happens, it feels like Bungie personally wanted to tell you to uninstall the game. Look, you did nothing wrong, but suddenly your team is down a player and you're back in the spawn screen. And once you realize it happened to you once, you're gonna start questioning every death, counting the bullets to see if you got unlucky yet again. Even when you're not feeling any lag at all, PvP still has plenty of frustrating moments to offer. Let's talk about space magic. This is the main theme of Destiny 2. We all like to abuse it, but it's not so fun being on the receiving end. That's why the next entry on our list is getting solo supered. You're on a hot streak, dropping guardians left and right. Maybe you even have your very first "we ran out of metal" streak in the back of your mind. Your opponents are falling like dominoes, 1, 2, 3, 4. And all that fun comes to a screeching halt because the Warlock decided to throw their Nova Bomb at you instead of the 3 teammates nearby who are capping a zone. If you get solo supered once, that's okay, someone probably just wanted revenge and used their one and done way to get you back. But if every single time you spawn there's a super flying at your face, that is really frustrating, especially if it stops you from getting an epic clip. Oh, the woes of LFG, looking for a group. Maybe you finally got over your fear of playing with other people that you don't know, and you joined a group for a raid or a dungeon and you started your adventure. The activity seems to be going okay and your teammates are nice enough. You finally get to the boss, maybe even the last damage phase of the final boss, when suddenly your screen goes black. The darkness slowly interrupted by the red hue of those frustrating words, "no longer in fireteam." From your perspective, things were going just fine. Was it your callouts? Maybe your loadout? Or maybe your fashion? Whatever the case may be, you got booted for no reason, missing out on those rewards and wasting your time. LFG can be a brutal place sometimes. Picture this, you and your team have whittled down the boss to the final stand. This is it, the culmination of your efforts, and everyone just needs to lock in for the final push. You aim down sights and exhale as you slowly squeeze the trigger on your final round and your teammate steps right in front of you. The manifestation of what happens next entirely depends on the weapon that you were just firing. If they blocked a non-explosive shot, you tell them to get out of the way and continue on, slightly annoyed that you just wasted your 4 times Izanagi shot or your Celestial Nighthawk Golden Gun, but nothing too drastic happened. If it was an explosive on the other hand, now they've indirectly killed you, and the thoughts of that boss clear slowly fade into a dream as you black out from rage at your wiggly teammates and their refusal to just stand still. All you can do is tell them to keep that 80-80 strafing pattern in PvP where it belongs. Although being blocked by teammates is definitely not only a PvE thing. I can't even begin to tell you how many times I've been blocked by a teammate when you're trying to get out of a sniper lane, or even blocked while you're trying to get into a sniper lane to take a peek. It's great to have teammates nearby to help you out in duels, but sometimes they take that idea a bit too seriously and they need to give you some room for your footwork. By far, one of the most frustrating things in PvP is related to throwing a punch, or rather attempting to throw a punch that just doesn't connect thanks to the melee whiff system. You know you're perfectly in range, or at least it feels like you are, but for some reason your guardian just can't seem to land a hit with those gloves, and 9 out of 10 times this ends up in death by shotgun. Any seasoned PvP player will tell you that those melee whiffs are very high on their list for the most annoying things that can happen in Destiny. Stasis did enough psychological damage to PvP players to inflict lifelong PTSD to anyone who played during Beyond Light. After getting Shatter Dive smashed to bits thousands of times and frozen for hours of our lives, it's amazing that we even made it through that era. But this torture wasn't enough according to Bungie, who decided that not only can Guardians freeze you at will in the Crucible, but it can also happen in PvE as well. While there's very few enemies capable of inflicting this type of irritation, this is possibly one of the most annoying things you can experience. You don't even have to die to this specifically for it to get on your nerves. Getting frozen by an enemy just feels bad, especially in higher level content where your lack of movement certainly spells out doom for you or your teammates. This next one requires basically no explanation, playing against bows in PvP. They may or may not be OP depending on who you ask, but one thing's for sure, getting sniped across the map with a bow that just never runs out of ammo can be pretty frustrating. But what's even worse is when that bow is a lemon arc, and not only did you or a teammate die, but that arrow also spread poison to the rest of your team. It's been tweaked a bit from time to time for balance sake, but one thing's for sure, it's pretty frustrating to play against in PvP. Going fast is one of the many joys of Destiny 2, and that joy was only enhanced when Bungie introduced the sword perk Eager Edge. This allowed players to take movement to new heights with things like well skating and shatter skating. There's one thing about this perk though that absolutely nukes the happiness of players attempting to go fast, and that's its highly aggressive enemy tracking. Trying to go fast through content that's packed with enemies is nearly impossible because the sword will pull you into a 180-degree turn in the opposite direction to find the one thrall that just happened to be near you in the encounter. This sudden change in momentum is jarring, and it oftentimes leads to your death as it's just going to drag you off edges or into holes where there's no escape. When you're playing a close game of Trials of Osiris and the match is all tied up at 4-4, it's pretty painful to watch your team go to orbit on a loss when your teammate never even popped their super. It's staggering how often this happens. People are afraid to waste their supers for good reason. It has the power to win a clutch situation and ultimately determine the match, but going to orbit without ever even using it is a hard way to take that loss. Destiny players love loot. There's nothing quite like that feeling of watching those rewards flow in, especially during times like double reward weeks where that screen will light up continuously with all the goodies that you're getting. Something even better though is watching that elusive exotic engram drop from your foes that illuminates the environment with its gentle golden light. You excitedly fly back to the tower and run over to Rahul, only for that excitement to turn into despair as you watch that blue-faced jerk decrypt your engram into one of two completely worthless options. You're either handed back the exotic you so desperately wanted but with stats in all of the wrong places, or you receive an exotic whose stats are absolutely perfect in every way, except that it happens to be on an exotic that you will just never use. At this point, I'm not really sure which one's worse, but it's not a great feeling either way. Ever since Bungie restructured the subclasses and gave each of them their own verbs, managing your buffs and debuffs in endgame content has been an absolute nightmare. It's pretty frustrating to die in a dungeon or a raid because you had 800 buffs on your screen at the same time and you couldn't see the important mechanic timers that are buried in all of the clutter. This has been a widely discussed topic in the community for some time now, and Bungie themselves have confirmed that UI changes will be happening sometime in the future, but as of the release of this video, those are yet to happen. Destiny players are experiencing deaths to unseen debuffs all of the time, and it's really not that hard to do. Just get an armor charge and one or two of those subclass verbs applied to you, and suddenly that all-important mechanic timer is pretty hard to keep track of. Here's another fun one in PvP. Remember our good friend the sniper rifle? It's one of my favorite weapon types in any video game, but it's a lot more fun to be on the sending end than the receiving end. Destiny has a built-in mechanic to protect you in these situations though. When you deal damage to someone who's using a sniper, it flinches their scope up, which should make it harder for them to aim. However, that definitely isn't always the case. How many times have you experienced something like this? You get your face blown off even though you shot your opponent first. Holy moly, this is such a traumatizing experience to go through, especially considering how reliably it occurs. And believe me, exposure therapy really doesn't help. The more it happens to me, the more I hate it. What do you call a special weapon that takes primary ammo? A problem. It's called a problem, and that's exactly what this gun is. The exotic Fighting Lion is the only primary grenade launcher in the game, and it's pretty hard to play against someone who's good at using it. Worst of all, most players who enjoy it just like to sit behind cover and spam it away all game long. They'll weaken you up, and then they'll use their endless projectile shots to track you down and clean you up. It feels downright unfair to go against a really skilled Fighting Lion user, but what's even worse is playing against a grenade launcher fanatic who not only has mastered the Fighting Lion, but also another grenade launcher to pair with it. I've faced a handful of these players over the years, and it's definitely one of the most tilting things to play against in Destiny. This one isn't necessarily the fault of the player specifically, but it's still something that can be annoying, and I'm talking about blueberries. No, not the delicious fruit, those random blue players that you experience out in the wild that somehow don't know anything about how the game works. You're trying to make a public event heroic? Not today. Trying to get some specific bounties done? Oops, the blueberry just stole all of your kills. Like I said, it's no one's fault specifically, especially when we can't really communicate with them easily, But without a doubt, encounters with random blueberries can be pretty frustrating. Teammates and damaging enemies seem to be a recurring theme on this list, and this one is no different. When enemies are immune, they're usually very obviously shielded, or at least have a shield bar right next to their health. And yet, time and time again, we see teammates wasting their precious supers or their heavy ammo on immune enemies while not dealing a single point of damage. They're wasting their potential damage, their ammo, and your time. While this may give you some bragging rights when you see how much more damage you did than them, this small victory may not necessarily outweigh the potential frustration of needing an extra damage cycle or wiping during the final stand. Reviving our character is a core theme and mechanic of the Destiny franchise. After all, that's why our ghosts exist in the first place. Even with this baked in emphasis though, we still encounter players out there who, for whatever the reason, refuse to revive their teammates. In Strikes, Crucible, Grandmasters, Raids, you name it, reviving is just not in their playbook. It's not happening. It's one thing if they're really far away or your ghost might be in a compromising position, but that's not what we're really talking about here. We're talking about the frustration that comes along when you see them standing right on top of you and yet they refuse to hold on to whatever the revive button is for a couple of seconds. Bonus points if they even teabag your ghost and still don't res you. One of the biggest frustrations is not really new to Destiny by any means. In fact, it's been plaguing online gaming for decades now. That would be cheaters. In PvP, these take many different forms. Some people like to wallhack, some like to aimbot, some like to speed hack, and some like to do a crazy combination of all of these while flying through the air like a dragon with infinite heavy ammo. The cheating epidemic seems to come and go as Bungie patches popular cheat providers out of the market temporarily, but they always seem to pop back up eventually. Every class likes to argue that their movement is the best, and every individual likes to argue that they're the best at parkour and jumping puzzles. All of that ego though comes to a screeching halt the second they encounter a wall, a rock, or really any piece of geometry that's just slightly off and sends you flying through the air to your death. Oh, you needed to mantle because you're out of jumps? Too bad. You hit that pebble slightly too fast and now you're ricocheting the opposite direction? Sounds like a skill issue. You got launched by a phalanx all the way across the map and now you have to walk miles back to the same spot? Time to get good. There's no denying that the game's physics engine is the most deadly enemy of all. This one's pretty niche, but it affects the more hardcore PvP community and it's annoying when it messes you up. There's been a long-standing bug in the game that will only let you slide 11 times in a row. The 12th time you try to slide, nothing happens and instead you just sit there crouched in a compromised position. It doesn't come into play too often, but if you're a PvP player who likes to slide around the map while you move, this one can pop up at very awkward moments. Destiny 2 players and reading are not often put together in the same sentence, so this next annoyance is almost certainly self-generated. You've slogged through the story mission, dungeon, or raid, or completed the activity and returned to orbit, only for your quest to not be completed because you didn't read the text about how you needed to interact with a certain object or open a chest somewhere within the activity. My friends and I have fallen victim to this one countless times as we're faced with the frustration of needing to run the activity yet again to complete this singular step for whatever we happen to be working on. Better yet, it's more frustrating when you realize that you never even picked up the quest in the first place. I can't even count how many times that has happened to me in the last 10 years. Have you ever seen one of these guys in PvP? Well, if you're on my team in PvP, I'm begging you, please don't shoot it while I'm next to it. It's amazing how many times the little strandling bugs have chased me down and led to my death because my teammates just couldn't seem to differentiate between the strand scarecrow and a real player. Unless you're 100% sure that the bugs won't come attack your teammates, it's probably best to just leave it alone and rotate somewhere else around the map. In Destiny PvP, not every spawn point is created equally. Some sides of certain maps put you at a huge disadvantage when it comes to certain modes like Control. These poor spawn locations can not only make it harder to win the game, but often you get spawn trapped where you'll keep respawning in the same area over and over again and dying quickly without much map control. If you know how to avoid these situations, you can actually use them to your advantage. But when you're playing with a bunch of random teammates, sometimes they love to spawn flip you right into trouble by pushing too deep into that enemy spawn. This will cause you to start spawning in this trouble area and it can end up losing the entire match for your team in some cases. What makes the situation even worse is when the enemy team starts popping supers while you're spawn trapped. It's not uncommon to die multiple times to the same roaming super. For example, the A flag spawn on Dead Cliffs is notorious for this situation. I'll admit, I've been on the offensive side of this spawn trap many times, and when it works out in your favor, it's great. It's maybe the easiest way to get a 7th column in Destiny, but when you're on the receiving end, it can be pretty tilting. One of the simplest and yet most frustrating things that can happen in any scenario is the screen bounce that happens when you hit the ground too hard. This effect has cost me countless kills in PvP since I like to play Hunter and hop up way high into the air. It's frustrating in PvE too, but in the Crucible it's a mechanic that I wish would straight up be deleted from the game. In the same vein, the extra flinch you experience from being shot in the side feels a bit excessive, right? I'm not a big fan of aim punch in any FPS game anyway, but the severity of the flinch that happens when you're getting shot in the side seems a bit extreme to me. I'd be happy to see this one toned way down sometime. Destiny players have been plagued with error codes since the beginning. We're all too familiar with the dreaded words like weasel, bee, baboon, guitar, and so on. These are annoying at best when you're doing low risk things like walking through the tower, focusing your engrams, running story missions, or customizing your character. They continue from there and increase in frustration when you're participating in match-made activities like the Crucible, Strikes, or Gambit. Finally, they become rage-inducing when you're participating in the highest level activities like Grandmaster Nightfalls or Day 1 raids. I'll never forget the pain that my group experienced on the Day 1 of the Witch Queen expansion raid Vow of the Disciple when I was trying to clear the first encounter with Bife and his buddies. We were getting error coded non-stop and came up with a million different theories on ways to prevent it, from not using any of our supers, to collecting every single orb of power, to turning off all the Warmind cells and elemental well generating builds. It was pretty stressful during a time when you're really racing against the clock for a clear. Game patches are a necessary requirement in today's landscape to ensure balance, player happiness, and overall longevity. But it can feel pretty bad when things that help the player progress faster, like a loot exploit, get patched instantaneously. Meanwhile, nagging issues like weapon and ability imbalance or small bugs seem to take months to even get looked at. It feels like things that benefit the player immediately get tuned, nerfed, or disabled, but things that actively harm the player or cause an inconvenience can linger for months to come. Is it a fine line to walk between pandemonium and a healthy ecosystem? Well, absolutely, and I won't discredit that. But still, it's a bit frustrating as a player to feel like patches so often work against you instead of for you. The Commendation System that Bungie introduced with Lightfall was meant to be an external source of player validation. In simple terms, higher score equals better, and if score equals big, then other players will be able to recognize you as a valuable, skilled, and fun player to join in activities. Unfortunately, Bungie also gatekept the Guardian rank system behind these scores, which kept many experienced players from reaching the higher levels. You're completely at the mercy of other players remembering to hand out these accolades if you ever desire to reach anything higher than rank 6. The Commendation System ships so half-baked that not only does it do a poor job of indicating if a player is a good person to play with, but it also actively encourages players to cheese them by various methods to progress through the Guardian rank system. Hopefully the whole setup gets an overhaul someday to make it a lot more useful. Up next, check out my video on 43 things that only Destiny veterans remember. I'm curious to hear how many of these you're familiar with. It's linked on screen and in the description.